Ladies and gentlemen, hello. Welcome to this press conference by Paolo De Castro, who just is coming out of a vote of the Agri Committee, a quite important vote where Parliament was incorporating the Next Generation EU and Recovery Fund into the transitional measures that had already been agreed beforehand. And Parliament has really fought tough here to get the funds available already next year and the year after. But yours is the floor. Would you like to announce the vote outcome?
Bene.
Thank you.
Va bene.
Buongiorno a tutti.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you. Yes, we have just received the final figures from the voting, and the European Recovery Instrument after the COVID-19 crisis gives the EAFRD an additional sum of over 8 billion at current prices. In the Commission proposal, it was meant to be available only after the entry into force of the new CAP, scheduled for the 1st of January 2023. In today's vote, and I'll give you the specific results in a moment, the European Parliament takes a clear position on this proposal by bringing forward fund availability from 2021, as early as that, and up to 2022. Given the unprecedented challenges faced down by the agricultural sector and our rural communities, the money should be available as soon as possible so that it can genuinely be given a stimulus capable of opening the way to economic recovery to support resilience, sustainability and digitalisation. In line with the Green Deal objectives and the Farm to Fork strategy and the biodiversity strategy presented in spring by the Commission, and in line with international commitments on the environment and climate. The text that we adopted, in fact, is the negotiating mandate, on the basis of which, therefore, we will be able immediately to open interinstitutional negotiations with the European Commission and Council, with a view to achieving an agreement that will then be signed off by the plenary, together with the transitional regulation, which, as you know, extends the current CAP by 2 years to the 31st of December 2022. Therefore, the Parliament vote is scheduled for the plenary session in December and is clearly linked to the agreement on the MFF, the Multiannual Financial Framework, that Heads of State and Government hope to agree as soon as possible. Let me run through some of the points in the report as soon as possible, as quickly as possible. In the final vote, there were 46 votes in favour, no votes against and 2 abstentions. It's a pleasure for me to be able to say that in all 7 compromise votes we got a majority in each case, and in some cases unanimity across all the political groups in the Agriculture Committee. I'm particularly happy, therefore, that our work was greeted so swiftly and so positively by all political groups. And that, of course, before summing up the content, is something I want to thank my staff for, in particular Dr. Lambertini, who, together with the rest of the colleagues, did some outstanding detailed technical work so that we could achieve, within a single shadows meeting, such a broad agreement and such a broadly supported agreement. The additional financing, just over 8 billion, is going to represent 925 million euro for Italy, my country, and that request will be subdivided 2.4 billion for 2021 and 5.6 for 22 at our request. That takes into account the fact that in 2021 European farmers will also benefit from a further 2.6 billion originating from rural development funding brought forward under the MFF. And therefore, in overall terms, we are talking about a full package for rural development of over €10 billion at an EU-wide level. For Italy, this would mean €1.22 billion. And on top of that, of course, you need to add in co-financing. This co-financing, as we have chosen to set out, starts at a minimum of 10% to a theoretical maximum of 400%. In other words, you could multiply those resources 5 times for those member states which wish to do so. Let's get down to the brass tacks then. These funds, we emphasise, must be properly effective in stimulating the sector, and they should not represent business as usual measures with no added value in terms of resilience, sustainability or digitalisation. And therefore we have stipulated that at least 55% of the 8+ billion should be used to support new farmers finding their feet, and above all investments that promote social development, economic development as well in rural areas. Following these objectives, greater efficiency in the utilisation of resources through focused farming, modernising equipment and productive investment, better health and safety in the workplace, and short supply chains and local markets, renewable energy and a circular economy and the bioeconomy, access to IT applications and high quality IT in rural areas. And this boost to innovation must be fully democratic, giving every farmer the possibility to access the funding, whatever size their farm and their training background. And against that backdrop, the intensity of support for this investment should be based on a spectrum of 40 to 90% for the more disadvantaged reasons. This must boost environmental, economic and social sustainability. At least 37% of funds will be targeted agro-environmental measures. That 37% is something we saw fit to stipulate because it was our President, Ursula von der Leyen, who in a State of the Union speech set out that objective on behalf of the Commission. Therefore, organic farming, adjusting to climate change will be targeted. Also the reduction of greenhouse gases emitted by farming, soil and carbon sink effect, water management and creation and maintenance of habitats propitious for biodiversity, reducing the risk from pesticides and animal welfare and other aspects contained in the LEADER programme. As regards the remainder of the funding, about 8% therefore, this percentage is one we decided to leave to the discretion of member states to give them the necessary flexibility. They can decide either to use it on the measures that we have stipulated or in other interventions contained in their respective rural development plans. Lastly, above and beyond a clear indication of where the additional funding should be spent, Parliament believes that the crucial rural development measures should be made more accessible and incisive, and that's why we've called for a rise in the ceilings for support to young farmers from 70,000, 100,000 will be the new ceiling for the aid to them, and then also support for farmers and farmers' organisations working on a quality regime such as the designated origins, and that will increase in terms of the allocation per farm. for those involved in those programmes and to support their promotion. COVID has demonstrated that we need more effective mechanisms to deal with atmospheric risks in farming, and for that reason we have also adopted by a very broad majority across all the members of the Agri Committee to increase mutual insurance funds for farmers. The current support is 70% and we shall increase that to 80%. In brief then, that is the work that we've done, and now we are expecting member states, heads of state and government to conclude their negotiations so that this can be part and parcel of the transitional regulation for the CAP ahead of the final vote to be taken by the plenary in December.
Now, before we take questions from the floor, let me remind you that if you're attending this press conference from remote, you can as well ask your questions through Skype, Voxbox EP. You write down your name, your media organisation, and we will take up your questions in this virtual room. But now let me give Angelo Di Mambro de l'agence ANSA the floor for a first question from remote. Angelo.
Grazie.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm from ANSA, the agency. Now, Mr. Castro referred to the current negotiations and the negotiations on the MFF, it seems, and partly the next generation EU. Now, you've been in the EP for over 10 years. So I'd like to know what you think about what's happening at the moment in the negotiations. There's a situation whereby in December there will be a vote on what you're tabling at the moment or a transitional regulation. What does that mean? That farmers risk having lower funds if there's no agreement between the Parliament and the Council on the MFF? Second question, on the Common Agricultural Policy. Next week, the reform text will go to the plenary. It's a proposal for a reform that the Parliament's never been keen on. I'd like to know whether you have managed to change that attitude regarding CAP reform. Thank you.
Sì, grazie.
Thank you for that question. Just very quickly. Firstly, the decisions to be taken by the heads of state and government on the overall package, that is made up of the MFF and the Recovery Fund. And those are the precondition to everything. So there can't be approval of a transitional regulation, not to mention of this part of the next generation EU for rural development, without an agreement from heads of state and government. That all depends on that. So I hope that with the efforts the presidency is making and with the latest news we've had from the last few days and hours, that we will be able to reach an overall agreement. Just to remind you that an overall agreement is necessary to allow for the 750 billion of the recovery fund to be released for all countries. And Italy has 209 million, so that's a big commitment there. It's essential because without that, the EU won't be able to put money behind any of its policies. So I'm quite hopeful that that will happen, that there will be an agreement by that time. We're ambitious in the European Parliament. We've called for a list of important points. We've asked for greater commitment from member states, but we are making progress. Just thinking of own resources, where member states have opened up considerably. That's one of the essential points for the Parliament, so I think we've made progress there. Regarding the CAP, I'm very happy to say that recently And at the moment, we're concluding all the compromises, so we're quite close to coming to a Parliament position, broadly shared, I hope, with broad consensus to take to Strasbourg next week. So that will that will be the single CMO, horizontal regulation, and so on. So I think we're moving in the right direction, and we have made a lot of effort to try and forestall many of the points from the Green Deal, farm to fork, biodiversity, general state of biodiversity, and they've come through by means of a communication from the Commission. And we have tried to anticipate that and to strengthen farmers' commitment to the environment. Just to remind you that at the Parliament we're trying to make sure that the social dimension is balanced with environmental and economic deal. So that's why we want things to turn out well on that front.
Do we have a follow-up question, Angelo? You're happy with the answer?
No, grazie.
Thank you. Next one is Steve Gilman from IHS Markit. Could you please ask your question?
Sure. Thank you very much. You just touched upon there that you want the next generation funds to address economic, social and environmental issues for farming, but a group of green groups today have slammed the leak amendments that S&D along with the EPP and Renew Europe have made on the CAP reform because they think it does not adequately support the environment. So do you have a response to the NGOs on that, specifically if this CAP position is not sustainable and that any extra money on top of that based on the deal that was made between the different parties could risk making the environmental situation on farms worse? Thank you.
Beh, intanto mi fa piacere sottolineare.
I'm happy to emphasize that the Greens group supported the work that we have just described on the next generation EU for rural development, and that was a particular pleasure for me because on board we had all the groups, including the Greens group, who, as is well known, were much more ambitious than others as regards environmental measures. In other words, the balance we held together was deemed to be positive. Also, in regard to the CAP, that balance can be achieved in Strasbourg next week. I don't think there will be any bad news as regards farmers. The only bad news is about a possible failure in the negotiations on the Recovery Fund and the MFF on the part of the heads of state and government, and I don't even want to think in terms of that contingency. I hope there's an agreement. As regards the content of the CAP reform, there's no doubt that we've pushed very far ahead. I think it's important to recollect that the objectives of the farm to fork and biodiversity strategy have been described in a communication and now have to feed through into legislative proposals, and Parliament must speak on those legislative proposals, as must Council. Then there would be a shared proposal and the necessary adjustments would need to be made so that the CAP, now over half a century old, can adapt to these new major challenges that Commission President Ursula von der Leyen put on the table and that we share. That needs to be translated into practice, including those environmental goals, of course. Farmers should aim to have farm businesses in the market that are capable of dealing with competition in the market and capable of tackling competition from other countries, where perhaps these quality standards and animal welfare standards are not followed. So we need to increase the standards at a European level and step by step ensuring there's reciprocity so that products entering Europe don't benefit from the fact they don't respect those standards. It's the usual step-by-step procedure, trying to come up with the broadest and most widely shared solution possible.
Thank you very much. Do you have a follow-up question, Steve?
Yes, I do. Just to clarify that criticism of the deal struck between the three parties I mentioned was more from NGOs, not necessarily the green groups, although I imagine they're equally concerned about some elements of the green criteria now in the position. That's all. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for this clarification. Now we also have a question in the room. Thanks for joining us here in the Parliament. Could you please give us your name and the media organization?
Of course. Okay. I removed that just for my question. My name is Sophie Dupuis. I'm working for the French media context. I just have two questions. One on the recovery fund. I'm not sure I really understand if you could explain how the next generation EU regulation and the transitional measures are articulated together. I'm not sure it's clear for me right now. And also I have a follow-up questions about the questions of my colleagues about CAP and this agreement that has been found between EPP, SND and Renew. I was wondering if Mr. De Castro was happy with this agreement concerning like the social dimension of CAP, and I've heard that there is some criticism among the SND political group, and what does it think about those inside divisions? Thank you.
Grazie della domanda. Dal punto.
Thank you for that question. In terms of the content, there are two parallel voyages. There's a current regulation for the CAP for 2 years, and in that there are all those rules that are to do with this reference to December 2022, and then there will be the next generation EU for rural development, which will be part of that regulation, and it will go hand in hand with the final vote of the plenary. So at the moment there are two twin tracks. I'm going ahead with my part. The next generation EU will have a trilogue as soon as possible with the German presidency in the Commission. At the same time, Ms. Katainen is working on the transitional regulation, and at one point those two tracks will merge when they will be put together to the December plenary, and there will be just one legislative text containing both of those provisions. Apart from that, as with all negotiations, there are always people that want more. Some people think there are too much. I'm happy. I think that the work that's been done and what will be done in Strasbourg, voted on in Strasbourg next week, is a good piece of work. There's been a root and branch reform of the CAP. We've taken on board all the inherent problems from the last Parliament. This new direction, which Ms. von der Leyen's Commission has wanted, is important. There's the social dimension that I'd like to stress, and that's partly in the compromises. In the S&D group, we thought there wasn't enough, so we're working at the moment on amendments for the plenary on behalf of our group, which should strengthen the social dimension, working towards a CAP which, aside from environmental issues, needs to deal with the social dimension. And we'll see this in next generation EU when we look at job security. But I think we can do plenty in the CAP reform. So I hope we'll get the support of other groups too in the Strasbourg plenary. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. De Castro. We're at the end of this press conference. So please, if you have further questions, you will find a press release on today's vote on the press room website of the Parliament. with the name and the phone number if you have more questions, be it on procedure or the political part. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Very well indeed.